So my name's Stacey Pattison. I work for Hockey Alberta in the member services. I sit in on the para hockey committee that we have here in Alberta. And thank you for your interest in this seminar. We're really excited to put this on. We, through working with our officials group and our para hockey committee, we came to realize that there was a little bit of a gap in officiating, and we wanted to close that gap. And the general consensus was that we found officials weren't necessarily confident enough to put their hands forward and take on a para hockey game. And that's what this session is hopefully here to do, is to bridge that gap, lay out the rules, and just the generic spirit of the game, and how it's a little bit different from stand-up hockey, and give the confidence to our current officials to get them to put their hands up and do these games. For those that are already currently Hockey Alberta registered officials that are on this call, we will work with you outside after this call and provide contact so you can get out there. There are many sledge groups across the province, and we would love it if you could even attend practices. There's generally scrimmages at practices, just so you can get your feet wet a little bit and get out there. And then before you want to hop into a game, if that would help ease your comfort level. We're in an interesting year here in Alberta where we're hosting not only Westerns, but also Nationals. And so we're always looking for officials to help out with these competitions as there's games that go on. We also want to thank everyone that's not from Alberta that also happened to join this call. It's amazing to see the interest in this across the nation, which is awesome. My other piece is that following this, tomorrow we'll be sending out a survey. And so I really encourage everyone to keep an eye on your emails. The information that we'll be asking just is to help us build content down the road between the various groups that are on here, between Brett Kelly, who's the manager of officiating with Hockey Alberta. We also have Dan Hanoomansingh, who is the manager of officiating with Hockey Canada, that will be speaking. And Tara Chisholm, who is the head coach of the national women's para team here in Alberta. And so we'll just be looking to ask a few questions and would greatly appreciate any and all feedback to help us build content. We're also hoping to keep this session close to about an hour. We will have, after Dan and Tara do their presentations, we will have a question period at the end. In the event you do have a question during, just put it into the chat and we will we'll insert it at an appropriate time. That's it for me. And from there, I will pass it off to Brett, who is our manager in Hockey Alberta.
Thanks, Stacey. Appreciate it. Stacey's done a lot of work to coordinate this, so we really appreciate that in the office. And we have a couple of fantastic guests tonight. Dan Hanoomansingh, who's our multi-talented manager of officiating for Hockey Canada, who has some experience in officiating para hockey, and of course our national women's para hockey team coach, Tara Chisholm. So I'm learning just like everyone else, or I've signed up to listen and find out about officiating para hockey more than anything else. But special thanks to Stace for coordinating it. And without further ado, I'll pass her off to Dan. Take her away, Dan.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Brett and Stacey, for getting us going, and obviously to Stacey for all the work she did sort of getting this together and ready to go. So I'm going to share my screen here. And just kind of by way of introduction, as Brett said, my name is Dan Hanoomansingh. I'm the manager of officiating for Hockey Canada. And one of the pieces that as the officiating program in Hockey Canada, really interested in is doing more for para hockey, both for the officials.
Okay,
we're going to work para hockey, but by extension, the sport of para hockey as a whole. We in the officiating program, we talk a lot about how officials are an important part of the game. And part of what we're viewing our responsibility as is to help officials be more prepared for para hockey, because it is growing. Even in the last sort of 5 years that I've been sort of involved, so to speak, in para hockey, it's grown a lot. And so this is something that we are really valuing and focusing on. And we really appreciate the partnership of Hockey Alberta and some of our other members across the country in terms of getting that going. So just to kind of get us started here, and I'm going to do a quick kind of intro and then I'll pass it off to Tara as well, is what we're going to sort of cover in this session today is what's sort of the background on what para hockey is, because we know everybody's coming in with a little bit of a different level of familiarity, and we'll get to that in a second. And then I'm going to talk about some sort of rule differences, but also officiating differences, procedural differences, different ways of doing things. And then we're going to come back and Tara's going to talk a little bit about officiating grassroots para hockey specifically, and what that looks like. And really, as sort of Stacey touched on, what we're really looking to do is threefold. Obviously, awareness is a big piece, but as I go around the country and I talk to people who have officiated para hockey, their story is a lot like mine in terms of how did they get involved in officiating para hockey. Basically, everybody I talked to was already an official. In a lot of cases, they were a reasonably experienced official, working a good level of hockey, and the opportunity to officiate para hockey just came along. And for those that took it, they really enjoyed it. They really loved it. But part of the experience of starting to work para hockey was not being comfortable, not being familiar with some of the procedures and ways of doing things, and that being a challenge. And so part of what we want to do is help ease that transition. If you're an official, even if you're not an official, but you're interested in getting into officiating para hockey, this is what we want to do. So with that in mind, what I'm going to ask us to do, just to kind of get us started here, because like I said, everybody's coming from different areas, and people may have different kind of levels of experience with para hockey, is I'd invite you just to drop into the chat here just a number. So you're seeing on the screen here, just your level of experience with para hockey, just so that both Tara and I have a sense of what's the level of background in the room. And it truly does not matter to us. We're here to sort of help walk you through it. But one being, I've maybe watched a para game or none at all. Two being that you've watched a fair bit, maybe a couple Paralympics worth. You've seen one of our national teams play, but you've never officiated. And then 3 or 4 being you've officiated some level of para hockey, which is awesome. So I'm seeing some plenty of responses coming in the chat. So thank you. I appreciate that. Bit of a range, which is awesome. First and foremost, to those of you that are more kind of in the 3-4 category, and I see a couple of you, it's great to have you here. And thank you for being here. And for everybody else who's at a 1 or a 2, or even a 0, doubly thank you for being here and for expressing your interest and for taking the time out of a Thursday evening to be on with us, because that's fantastic. So with that in mind, and I appreciate that, what we're going to do is we're going to jump to kind of just a brief introduction into what para hockey is and kind of some of the ways it works. And so for that, I'm going to pass it over to Tara to talk a little bit about that.
Great. Thank you, Dan. And thanks to Stacey and Brett also for those introductions. I know we have a lot of para hockey coaches and players that signed up for the clinic today. Just so you're aware, this was designed for officials. So a lot of this information you're already going to be familiar with. Dan might be going over some things that you maybe have never thought of because it's from an official standpoint. Whereas a lot of the things that I'm going to go over are things that you're familiar with. So just when you go to a report on the survey at the end, if you decide to do that, this is intended for an official lens when you look at it. All right. So for those who are at that 1 or 2 level or haven't had the opportunity to get very familiar with para hockey, it is a Paralympic sport. So currently going on right now, the men are playing tonight, actually. So after this, head over to the CBC app and get in there to watch. But it did start in the Winter Games in 1994. And it was originally designed for individuals with lower body disabilities. We'll show a video for those of you who haven't been familiar or ever had the opportunity to watch sledge before, or para hockey as it's now called. It does have the same rules as the IIHF with some modifications. And so those are some of the things that we're going to talk to tonight. And instead of skates, players use double blade sleds that allow a puck to pass beneath them. And in para hockey, we have 2 sticks with spikes on the end for pushing, and then a blade end for shooting, passing, and stick handling. And there is a great resource for those that are interested in learning more about para hockey from Sportability BC, about a grassroots level coaching manual, and it gives you a lot of insight into the sports itself. So I encourage people to go and check that out.
Impairment wanted to continue playing hockey. The men modified a metal frame sled, or sledge, with 2 regular-sized ice hockey skates. Using round poles with bike handles for sticks, they played without any goaltenders. 2 Swedish national teams played an exhibition match at the inaugural Örnsköldsvik 1976 Paralympic Winter Games. But it wasn't until Lillehammer 1994 that ice sledge hockey became a Paralympic official event. The Paralympic version of ice hockey has become the most popular Paralympic sport. Played by male athletes with a physical disability in the lower part of the body, it is fast-paced and highly physical. Instead of skates, players use double-blade sledges that allow the puck to pass beneath. Players use 2 sticks, which have a spiked end for pushing and a blade end for shooting. 2 sticks facilitate stick handling and shooting from either side of their bodies. The goaltender may have an additional pick at the base end of his stick. The goaltender may also use an additional stick with a blade or a trapper glove with teeth. Because of the physical nature of the game, all players are required to wear a helmet with a full cage or mask, as well as a protective collar or bib. Players also wear shoulder pads, shin guards, elbow pads, and large padded gloves. In addition, the goalkeeper wears leg pads, body pads, a helmet with a visor, and a catcher's glove. Sledges are made of aluminum or steel and are 0.6 meters to 1.2 meters in length, with a curved front end and 1 or 2 different seating systems. The 2 blades under the sledge are usually made of tempered steel and are each 3 millimeters thick. The height of the main frame must be between 8.5 centimeters to 9.5 centimeters above the ice, and the length of the blade may not be more than 1/3 of the total length of the sledge. The sledge may be equipped with a backrest, but it must not protrude laterally beyond the armpits when the player is properly seated. Straps secure a player's feet, ankles, knees, and hips to the sledge. Sticks have a maximum length of 1 meter and are made of wood, plastic, or composite materials. The blade has a maximum length of 25 centimeters, except for the goaltender's blade, which has a maximum length of 35 centimeters. The pick end of the stick must not damage the ice surface or inadvertently puncture or slash other players, so the following rules apply. No part of the pick or teeth may come to a sharp point. The pick must not extend more than 1 centimeter beyond the stick. The pick must have at least 6 teeth, each with a maximum length of 4 millimeters. Ice sledge hockey games consist of 3 15-minute periods. 6 players from each team are on the ice at one time, usually 3 forwards, 2 defensemen, and a goaltender. 8 nations compete in the Paralympic Games. For the preliminary rounds, these
All right, so Dan's going to talk about how many of those were penalties that was shown in those games. For those that have seen para hockey before, you could probably, that was an old school video. So there wasn't as great officiating, but now there will be because we have clinics like this. And also I should note that video did come into play before women were involved in the game or allowed in the game at the Paralympic level. So women and men both play. So I'm going to talk a little bit more on this slide about who can play. So at the national and international level, players do have to have a disability that impairs their lower body according to classification guidelines. So for those of you who are just getting into para hockey and just looking to get your feet wet in officiating, do not worry about classification. There are classifiers, people who are trained to go and assess who can and can't play at the national and international level. So that definitely does not fall on your plate. At the grassroots and provincial level, players do not have to have a disability to play. So this is often a misconception that we hear is, oh, I thought everybody had to have a disability. Yes, at the national level, but not at the provincial or grassroots. Potentially one day for the provincial level, but we're still building the amount of athletes in that pool. So for us in Alberta, and it differs from province to province, but us in Alberta, we separate into different divisions. So for us, it's junior is what our kids are called. So 18 of age and under with a novice skill level, and there's no body contact in that division. Then we have 2 adult levels, intermediate, which has intermediate skill level, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the grassroots section. And it does have full body contact. And then senior level is actually open to all ages, but you have to have what's considered an advanced skill level, and that is full body contact. Usually we see 16 and above in a senior level, just so the players are physically mature enough to play against adult players. But like I said, it does differ from province to province, which is one thing that we'll be working on as a nation to try and improve so that it can be a little bit more consistent across the board.
Thanks, Tara. Yeah, so talking a little bit now in more of an officiating specific context. And I think, again, like Tara said, this is sort of designed for, we sort of prepared this with the intention of people who had some officiating background or interest, particularly through hockey. And so one of the things that I think it's really important to keep in mind is that although para hockey is significantly different from stand-up hockey, it is at the end of the day hockey. And as we go through some of these rule differences, there aren't a ton of rules that are actually different in terms of the infraction or how the game operates. It's primarily differences in how we as an official would enforce that standard, what we would be looking for, how we would do things. The game itself is quite similar to what we're used to. And just like when you're working stand-up hockey, there's different levels of ability and ages that run the entire spectrum. And so keeping that in mind, what we'll start with is the only true, what I would consider to be the only true rule difference, which is a penalty in para hockey that just doesn't exist in stand-up hockey, which is teeing. And the act of where a player hits an opposing player with their sled at or near a right angle. And you can see that in the picture here on the slide, which is a prohibited form of body contact. And one of the things that'll come out when Stacey sends the follow-up tomorrow is there's a really good video, which unfortunately is made by USA Hockey, but it is really good, that walks through some of these infractions, and you get to see a number of examples. So I won't go into too much detail because there's only so much kind of explaining you can do in this moment, but there will be a video in the follow-up. And again, what we're looking for here is that at or near a right angle that's not body contact. And when we think about body contact or body checking in a para context, we are thinking truly of body contact, like contact with the body, as opposed to using the sled to smack another sled. So really, that's the one major rule difference. Everything else that we're going to look at here is more of a nuance, either in terms of the rule itself or how we as an official would enforce it. So with that in mind, jumping to a couple here, and again, not outright rule differences, but some things to keep in mind as an official. And I'll talk a little bit more about the process or the positioning here in a minute. But if we start with holding, now the thing that comes out here is, especially if your background is in stand-up hockey, is holding's not a huge deal in stand-up hockey. Yes, it's a penalty. Yes, we see it. But at the end of the day, it's a minor of the minor penalties. But in para hockey, holding is more impactful just because of the sheer amount of work it takes to generate momentum if you're a para athlete. And the amount of work that it takes to get moving. So even what in stand-up hockey you would consider to be a fairly minor hold or grab or clutch can have a much more significant consequence. And again, for us as officials, we think about that intent and consequence. Well, here the consequence can be a lot more significant in terms of how the game is played. And then again, in terms of what are we looking for as an official, well, we also have to look not just for grabbing at the arm or the body or the stick, but also on the sled as well. And depending on the athlete's body and how their sled is constructed, a holding infraction might occur kind of away from the main part of the body, right? You might grab onto the front of the sled or give a little pull there somewhere where we're maybe not used to looking. And so that's something to keep in mind. And when we talk about positioning in a minute for a referee, holding's very difficult to see if you're not in position, which at the end of the day is no different than officiating stand-up hockey. If you're not in position, you're not going to see what you want to see. So that's holding. Butt ending, also an infraction in stand-up hockey, but in stand-up hockey, we don't see it very much. I've refereed hockey for this is my 20th season refereeing. I've never called a butt ending penalty in stand-up hockey, just because it's so uncommon. But in para hockey, there's two things. Number one, it is a little bit more common just because of the nature of how the sport is set up. And it could be done by accident, just again, because of the way that they are playing with their two sticks. But because of the picks on the end of the stick, it is dangerous, more so than in stand-up hockey, and not only more dangerous, but also just more frustrating, right? If you're getting clipped with the butt end of a stick that has a pick on the end, obviously a lot different than just getting hit with the knob of a traditional hockey stick. So again, something to be aware of. But for those of us coming in with a background in stand-up hockey and you come to para hockey, all of a sudden you're seeing a lot more, or you could see, I shouldn't say you will, you could see, you're likely to see a lot more butt ending infractions. Similar to holding, falling on the puck, obviously because of the positioning of the players, which is a lot closer to the ground or to the ice than in stand-up hockey, a lot more, or can be more challenging to see, but easy way to gain an advantage, particularly in competitive para hockey, where perhaps off a face-off, a player will fall on the puck and use their body to shield the puck while they slide the puck away to a teammate, either with their hand or with the stick. And again, this is where our positioning comes into play. But if we think about as individuals in stand-up hockey, whether we're playing or officiating or coaching stand-up hockey, you don't see a lot of falling on the puck, either intentionally or unintentionally, really past maybe the U9, the U11 level. But in para hockey, it becomes a tactical advantage, possibly, in addition to just accidental. So again, something to be aware of when we're coming into and when we're thinking about positioning, and you're thinking about, what do I actually have to see as an official when I'm working para hockey? So coming on to body checking, and again, depending on the level and the division, the classification of para hockey that you're working, there may or may not be body checking in the game you're working. But the thing about body checking that's a little bit different between para hockey and stand-up hockey is that it's a lot more important in para hockey that the body check is a body check. It is a check with the main part of the body to the main part of the body. So we're thinking shoulder to shoulder or shoulder to chest. And for those of us that are familiar with particularly officiating stand-up hockey, particularly at that U15 level where players are learning to hit, we'll see players hit with their hands that come up. We'll see them hit with an arm, even if it's not an elbow, right? They'll make the hit and their arm will extend. In stand-up hockey, unless it's to the head, we're usually not super concerned about that kind of hitting in stand-up hockey. Now, contrast that to para hockey. If you have an arm or an elbow raised, again, even if it's not to the head, what you can end up with is a player getting clotheslined because of I'm not a physics guy, but just because of the physics and the way the players are set up, it's a lot easier to get that clothesline effect as soon as you have an arm or an elbow extended. And so that's an example of something where, in theory, body checking, body contact is the exact same rule in stand-up versus para hockey, but we need to be a little bit more mindful in terms of how we enforce it, just because even if the act is the same, the consequence can be a little bit different. And that's something that we need to be aware of. And then a couple of smaller ones here are sort of less, maybe not smaller, but less kind of common. For a penalty shot, criteria is the same. When we think about for a penalty shot under a Hockey Canada or double IHF rule, they have to be on a breakaway. They have to be in possession and control of the puck. They have to be fouled from behind. They have to be denied a reasonable scoring opportunity. In this case, the key here, and this is more of a criteria, is from behind refers to the position of the players' bodies. So even if you look at their sleds, and their sleds are more or less neck and neck, if the body of the defensive player is behind the body of the attacking player, we would consider that to be fouled from behind. And again, this is where, like when we talked about holding, we got to keep in mind how difficult it is to generate momentum with a sled. Because when we're thinking about whether or not a player was fouled in that way that we talk about in hockey, and were they denied a reasonable scoring opportunity. In stand-up hockey, sometimes we are, in my opinion, a little bit too quick to say, oh, well, they got a shot off. It's maybe they got a shot off. And again, thinking about stand-up hockey, maybe they got a shot off from their knees, or they got a shot off as they were falling. Is that a reasonable scoring opportunity? Well, the thing to keep in mind in para is once you lose that momentum, again, if we're thinking about a hold or a hook, it's very difficult to generate that momentum again. That takes a lot of work. So when we're thinking about, was a player fouled, number one, the idea of being from behind relative to the bodies, not the sleds. And then additionally, what's the degree to which they were fouled, and making sure that we are, again, preserving the scoring opportunity for that player. And a couple of last ones, high sticking the puck. This one, so high sticking when it comes to the puck, the determining factor is the player's head rather than their shoulder. So again, in stand-up hockey, we look to a player raises their stick above their shoulders. That would be considered high sticking. The puck. In para, it's above the player's head. Now, obviously, that only applies to high sticking the puck. If a player uses their stick and accidentally or intentionally hits an opposing player in the head, we would penalize that, obviously. But when it comes to high sticking the puck, trying to get a deflection or tip or what have you, whether that's trying to score a goal or trying to block the puck, we would look to the height of the head. Any higher than that, and we'd whistle that for high sticking the puck, but any lower, and we are good to play on. And then the last one's a little bit of an odd one. Just in the sense that if we think about a cross-checking action in stand-up hockey, we're thinking about something very specific. 2 hands on the stick, striking an opposing player. That's what we think of as cross-checking. In para hockey, we still have the cross-checking infraction, but it's where a player takes both of their sticks off of the ice. So they don't have the pick on the ice, they don't have the blade on the ice, and they use their hands or the sticks to check an opponent. And this one is, again, same infraction, but quite different. It's not what we think of as cross-checking, because obviously players have 2 sticks rather than 1, but it's the same concept, which is that the sticks are coming off the ice. They're no longer being used to play the puck, right? They're no longer a tool that's part of the game, and they're being used to check an opponent. So when we see players in para going into body checks, assuming that you're in a division where body checking is legal, we want to look for where both sticks come up off the ice. And again, we can also fall back to what we spoke about with body checking, which is that we really want to make sure body checking is body to body, as opposed to hands or arms to body, just because of the impact that can have. So those are a couple of the rule differences. And again, when Stacey sends out the follow-up, there's some really good resources just in terms of being familiar with what does this look like, right? What does a clean body check look like in a para game? What does even something as basic as stick handling? What does stick handling look like in a para game, in a grassroots versus a more competitive game? All of that stuff is covered in one of the videos that that Stacey will send out tomorrow. So with that in mind, just a couple more kind of officiating specific things to think about here. And again, this is where we really emphasize it's the same sport, right? Played with basically the same rules. So offside, the key factor for an offside is still the position of the player's blades, right? The difference being instead of 2 skate blades, we've got the blades on the bottom of the sled, and that's what we're using to make the judgment of, is this player offside or onside? Same thing with icing. Icing's no different. The only thing for us as officials is we have to think about, if we're going to wash out an icing because we think the defending player could have played it, we have to be really sure that the puck was close enough to them that they could play it. Because again, a para player is just not going to move as quickly as the equivalent stand-up player, just because of the nature of the game, right? So if we're thinking about icing, we're just looking for a little bit of a different judgment. Face-offs are also a little bit of a departure for us coming from stand-up hockey, primarily because in para hockey, we need to get low and present the puck on our face-offs. And for those of us with background in officiating stand-up hockey under Hockey Canada, we look for kind of an upright body, knees bent, but we're not crouching down, not like they do in the NHL or the Western Hockey League where they present the puck. We always say in Hockey Canada, stand up more or less straight with a knee bend and drop the puck. In para hockey, we want to do what we're seeing on the screen here even at the lowest levels, which is present the puck out so they can see it, present it at a low enough level so the players aren't trying to look up to see where you're holding the puck. And that's what we need to do in order to make sure that the faceoffs are fair. And the setup for a faceoff, again, as you can see, is a little bit different for the centers, and that they're going to face sideways so that they can play the puck with their sticks. But otherwise, the conduct of the faceoff is basically the same, right? All other players are going to be outside the circle. You're going to put the puck down and they're going to play on. One difference for a referee is that in general, again, if we're thinking about how we see what's going on in a para game as opposed to a stand-up game, we want to be on the same side of the ice as the face-off usually to get a good view of the players taking the face-off, any potential infractions off the face-off. So that's one of those things when it comes to positioning, small change that really impacts how we do things. And then the last two pieces here, one is just line changes, and this is relatively straightforward. Again, under Hockey Canada for stand-up hockey, we think about 5 seconds for a line change, but obviously in para, just not moving as quickly, especially if we're talking about getting off the bench. And we'll talk a little bit about the bench versus the on-ice bench in a minute. But also making sure we're clearly visible to the benches, making sure we're working on that communication piece, because at the end of the day, what we want to do is let them change lines. And again, it's a little bit different can be a little bit different in para hockey as opposed to stand-up. Now, going through all of this, a lot of the stuff, like I said, is very similar to stand-up hockey between para hockey in terms of the rules and a little bit of difference in terms of the enforcement. Based on everybody that I've talked to, including obviously my own experience with para hockey, the biggest challenge for an official that has experience in stand-up hockey moving to para hockey is the positioning piece. Because the positioning for para hockey really is, some of the sort of ideas around that is fundamentally quite different compared to stand-up hockey. And the big one is that in para hockey, we want to be on top of the play. Not necessarily literally, but kind of literally. We want to be right in the vicinity of the play, because if we're thinking about where the players are, right, very low to the ice surface, and what we're looking for, and when we just talked about things like holding, butt ending, we're falling on the puck, hand passes, we're not going to see that stuff if we are in our traditional stand-up hockey area, which is, as I've put on the slide here, 1 to 3 meters away from the play, right? In stand-up hockey, if you're closer than a meter to the play, you're trying to figure out a way to get out of there and get away as far away from the play as possible. But in para hockey, we need to be a lot closer. Similarly, both for referees and linespersons, we're getting off the boards as much as possible. One of the things to keep in mind is that, and it is an adjustment coming from stand-up hockey, is that para players just take up more room on the ice relative to stand-up players in terms of their sort of horizontal area taken up. So as a referee, you're trying to get close to the play, but at the same time, you're obviously trying to stay out of the way. And that necessitates you to get a little bit creative with your positioning as compared to in stand-up hockey. We have sort of more rigid positioning and say, home base, half piston, at the net, you follow through that system 90% of the time. In para hockey, it's a lot different. You have to turn to face the boards sometimes. You have to skate out into the middle of the ice sometimes, whether you're crossing behind the net or as the play's going up, you're crossing behind in the neutral zone. Those are all things that we do normally. Same thing for linespersons, where in stand-up hockey, we basically tell a linesperson, never bump out off the boards, never bump from the boards into the middle of the ice, because that's just not where you want to be. But in para hockey, you've got to get out of the way somehow. And part of the game is, and part of the strategy of the game is to come down the boards in order to shield the puck from the opponent. So with that in mind, you may have to find yourself as a linesperson all the way into the end zone to stay out of the way, but you also may find yourselves bumping out into the middle of the ice just to avoid the players. And then the last two, these are a little bit more straightforward, but it is a bit of an adjustment. Number one, being very careful skating backwards, just because you really have to make sure the area behind you is clear. And you're not always, going to have, it's when you make that transition, and those of you that have made it know that transition from officiating stand-up hockey to officiating para hockey, very challenging around the spatial awareness piece and kind of instinctively knowing where players are. And then the last one is just don't jump. Now, as manager of officiating for Hockey Canada, I would say probably don't jump ever, even when you're officiating stand-up hockey. Just get into position rather than jump. But in para hockey, extremely do not jump for obvious reasons in terms of where your skate blades would be relative to the players. So again, that's just kind of a quick overview around some of the major differences, again, coming from the perspective of an official working who has some experience in stand-up hockey, and coming over to para hockey, some of the basics there. And that's something that, is challenging for everyone, but at least if you're prepared for it, it's a little bit better. But with that in mind, one of the areas of focus for us is specifically on grassroots para hockey. And what that looks like. And again, helping people be comfortable going into a grassroots para hockey environment. So I'm going to turn it back to Tara to talk a little bit about some things to be thinking about as you're going into a grassroots para environment.
Great. Thanks, Dan. That was great. So there are many things to think about when you go into grassroots para hockey, but I thought we would stick to kind of the main three for tonight. And there's definitely more content that Dan and I have spoke on. We've brought in Jade from Sportability BC to talk about this. And this is not where this education will end, but a good starting point for us all to hopefully encourage more officials to get into the sport of para hockey. So yeah, Dan, you can skip forward. Perfect. So in grassroots para hockey, so this would be our junior level and then our intermediate level. Potentially, and then we're starting to go up into seniors, and then provincial and national levels is more where Dan was speaking of some of those nuances. But for us in grassroots, we may have athletes that would not be able to successfully participate in the play alone. So they would have to have someone assist them. This might be because they have a disability that doesn't allow them to propel themselves to keep up with the speed of play, or potentially they have a cognitive disability that doesn't allow them to follow the play. So there's a variety of reasons as to why there might be somebody who is a stand-up player that would be pushing them around the ice, kind of as you can see in this picture here. Go to the next slide. Perfect. Thank you. So there are some rules with pushers, and when people start pushing, they get very excited because usually these athletes aren't in the play a lot, so they really want to push them fast and get them in there. And I don't blame them, but I know as a coach, and then when working with officials, there are some rules around pushers that we do need to make sure we're aware of so that it's not unfair to other players on the ice. So I'm going to go through these rules that we follow here in Alberta when it comes to pushers. So the pusher, so the person that is standing behind that person pushing them on the ice, may not intentionally stop or pass the puck with their skates. And you can ask any pusher, this is very hard to do when you see a puck go by you, but you have to resist the urge because it's about letting that player you're pushing interact with the puck and not you. The pusher cannot skate faster than the average speed of the players on the ice on both teams. So this is a difficult one for some newer pushers to get the hang of. But as a referee, as an official, you can talk with the coach or you can talk with the pusher themselves and remind them, because you should get a sense as the first period goes on what the average speed of the play is, and that's what they should be going and pushing their player at. The pusher may not skate backwards with the player, only to turn. So if they're in tight spaces in the corner and you would see a player without a pusher back up a couple of strides with their sticks, that's okay. But if they're literally skating backwards like they're on defense with their player, that's not allowed because we don't skate backwards in para hockey. So you wouldn't expect that of a player that's being pushed. The other thing the pusher is not able to do is to coach other players on the ice while pushing. So they're out there to assist the player that they're pushing and not to coach the team as a whole. And then the pusher cannot dominate or intimidate other players. So some pushers get quite aggressive with their pushing and use their player to kind of push other players around, especially in a competitive style game. And, there is a same as the speed, there's a level of intensity of the game. So if they're staying within that level of intensity with the player they're pushing, but they can't, ride people off or cause interference with the person they're pushing, as that would be unfair. So with all of these things, the official would assess a warning to the pusher, and then after, there can be a penalty called if that pusher is not abiding by these rules above. And then Dan spoke to it a little bit earlier, but in para hockey, there are some rinks that are sledge accessible or para hockey accessible. This one in this picture you can actually see is. However, the lip was too big to successfully allow our players to go in and out of the bench without significant struggle. So they decided to be on the ice, which is what you would typically see in a lot of rinks, because there's only a handful of rinks in every province that are para hockey accessible. So what we ask during gameplay is all players just sit right in front of their bench. They try their best to be on their bench side of the blue line so as to not interfere with offsides. And then if the puck does go into the bench, they have, and again, this is up to you as an official with regards to your own level of comfort, but about like 1 to 5 seconds of getting that puck out of the bench in a way that's neutral. So it can't be to their teammates they pass it to. They're on the bench. Typically, they wouldn't even been on the ice if the rink was sledge accessible. So because they do have to sit on the ice, they need to make sure that there's no unfair advantage when they push the puck out. And it's usually just a couple feet away from them. And it's up to the officials. Some officials just blow down the puck right away or the play right away if the puck goes into the bench, especially if it's starting to become an aggressive game because they don't want anybody hit. But for the most part, people are pretty good about just putting it out back into play and then continuing on. And then these are some additional roles. And from coaching grassroots para hockey for quite a while, these are some of the things that I've worked with officials on. And I find that people who officiate para hockey are really good-hearted people and looking for a new challenge or something new to get their feet wet in. So by no means are these things that you are required to do, but just making you aware that these might be questions that you could be asked when you're officiating grassroots, and it's up to your own comfort level. So one of the things that can happen, especially within our juniors, just like when we see our under eights, where they have trouble getting up, and even you're watching them trying to get up on their own for quite a while, eventually you just go over and help them. That can be the same within para hockey. So we do have some players who might tip over and they might need assistance. If there's a player who tips over a lot, often that team will have somebody on skates on the coaching staff that will go out and upright that player. So that's something, if you're coaching the same or officiating the same team a lot and they seem to have a few players that are needing a lot of support during the game, that might be something that you suggest to them or bring back to Hockey Alberta so they can communicate with that team on that. The other thing that I would encourage you to do at the grassroots level is to connect with the coaching staff ahead of time and seeing if there's anything that you should be aware of. With para hockey, especially at the grassroots level, it's not just athletes with physical disabilities that play, or they might have more significant physical disabilities that play than what you see in the Paralympics. So, for example, you might have a player who has a cognitive disability who might need guidance with where to be at the face-off. So they might have teammates that are trying to assist them, but if you don't mind pointing them in the right direction, it will help to get the game to go faster, or just to make sure you're loud and clear if they are offside. I'm sure their teammates, again, will be yelling at them to support them in that way, but to have an official guiding them in the process is always appreciated too. Another thing that I've had happen in the past is I have had goaltenders with more limited mobility, so they're not actually able to flop over and cover the puck. So before the game, would connect with the official and say, if the puck goes underneath their sled and they kind of pinch both sides with their arms so they're stick and their glove kind of lock in that puck underneath their sled, that's their equivalent of covering the puck with their glove. And then the whistle couldn't be blown. And for the most part, a lot of the para hockey teams are very used to playing each other quite often because there's only so many of us in our provinces. So everyone kind of gets used to these unwritten rules that come into play at grassroots level to make sure that everybody can successfully participate and contribute to the game in a way that works best for their disability. So those are just some of the examples of nuances that you could gain at the grassroots level that might be a little bit different from a high performance level. And then just a reminder for anyone looking to get into para hockey officiating is that I'd encourage you, even though people are coming in with their own disabilities, and at the grassroots level they may not have a disability because it's open to those with and without, is to treat them like an athlete. So as Dan said, there are people, it is sport, people are competitive, so they're going to fall on the puck, they're going to run interference, they're going to put their hands up when they check. And just because they're a person with a disability doesn't mean they don't deserve a penalty. So it doesn't matter what level you're playing. That's how we teach as coaches. That's how we teach our athletes how to play and get better. And sometimes, we'll tell the official, watch my player's hands. Like if his hands go up, please call him because he needs to know that that's not safe. And we've told him many times. But sometimes we find that officials will not do that because they don't want to make anyone feel bad, or I'm not too sure why it is, but treat them as athletes. So treat them just as you would a stand-up hockey player. If they're doing something that's not safe or in the rules, please call it. And then if para hockey is a developing sport, so if there's questions that you have, or if you have ideas, like if there's things that you see from your officiating lens that you think could help to improve the game from your perspective, please bring it forward. We're always looking to improve and grow as a sport. And I think the more eyes that we have on it, and having people with experience in stand-up coming over and seeing the differences and anything that we can do, I think is always appreciated to hear that feedback. So we have a para hockey committee here with Hockey Alberta. And then Dan is obviously a really great resource along with Brett. So if there's anything that you see or have questions on, please ask. And we'd be happy to listen or hear your ideas.
Absolutely. And just to kind of build off that as we sort of start to wrap up what we've prepared. And so again, if there are any questions, I know I saw one in the chat, but if there are any other questions, now's the time to start sort of dropping them in the chat or thinking about it. But the big thing that I take away from my experience in para hockey is that it is an opportunity to do something a little bit different, right? It's an opportunity to take this, especially if you're already an official in stand-up hockey, it's an ability to take those skills, or an opportunity to take those skills and do something that's just a little bit different, a new challenge, a new experience. And so to that point, we have some people in our country who are phenomenal experts in para hockey. But we also have a lot of gaps. And that's part of the reason why Tara and I have been working together and with Stacey and thinking about this, is because we do have gaps. Whereas in stand-up hockey, not that Hockey Canada does everything really well, because we don't, but we more or less have a handle on how to develop officials around stand-up hockey. Para hockey is a new challenge for me. It's a new challenge for Hockey Canada in terms of getting our officials ready to do that. So there is an opportunity for those of you that have already been involved, or those of you that are interested in getting involved, to really make an impact on the sport from the officiating perspective. And good officiating helps to grow the game in terms of, as we talk about in Hockey Canada all the time, that safe and fair standard, no different than in any level of stand-up hockey. If we as officials can bring that to para hockey, that's good for the game, and it grows the game. And so to that point, just kind of as a closing piece, and this is based on, again, not just my experience, but also the experience of just about everybody that I've talked to. People that have tried officiating para hockey really like it, especially if you can get a couple of games to sort of get over those growing pains. People who officiate para hockey really enjoy it, whether that's at the grassroots level or the more competitive level. I don't know anybody who's tried it that has something negative to say about their experience. And part of that is a couple of things. It's just a bit of a different culture around the game. And one of the things when I started working para hockey in about 2017 was I'd been an official for about 15 years, and I was doing junior hockey and elite kind of stand-up hockey. And coming into para hockey was an opportunity to feel like I was actually doing something useful and appreciated with my officiating skills, as opposed to going into a junior hockey rink or a AAA hockey rink and being told I suck all the time, which, I'm used to and kind of enjoy. But it was nice to think like I'm actually facilitating the game. And it almost goes back to, those early experiences. If those of you that are officials, if you've gone out and mentored and you see U7, U9, U11 stand-up hockey, and you see that just playing for the love of the game and the official as a helper to play for the love of the game, officiating para hockey is almost a way to kind of reconnect with that, because it is a lot of fun. And again, it's the same game, fundamentally. And then the last one is, and this is something, again, for those of you that are maybe already involved in para hockey, or are looking to get into it, quite frankly, it's important at every level, but there is an opportunity to advance, and to do something that maybe you wouldn't have the opportunity to do in stand-up hockey, because in stand-up hockey, we have tens of thousands of officials. We have thousands of elite officials. It's hard to make that impact. And so with that in mind, in para hockey, there's an opportunity to get comfortable with the sport, work games in your local area, and have the opportunity to advance. Every year, Hockey Canada hosts a para tournament in the Canadian Tire Para Cup. Hopefully in this year, in 2022, it will be in Bridgewater, Nova Scotia. But there's an opportunity there. And right now we have 2 officials plus a supervisor at the Paralympics in Beijing right now. So there is an opportunity not only to, again, at the grassroots level, just be involved in a meaningful way, but then also have some opportunities moving forward if you are able to access para hockey in your local area, whether that's grassroots or more competitive, obviously, depending on where you are in the country. Every area in the country has a little bit of a different, everybody's a little bit of a different level of comfort, but it's just something to be aware of there as well. So with that in mind, I know I can see the little bubble, that there has been some stuff coming in the chat. So we'll sort of turn to that. And again, if there are any other questions coming in, let's definitely get onto those.
Okay, so I can moderate that piece for you, Dan. The first question that came in was regarding the on-ice bench, and it was, could an interference penalty be called if a player on the ice bench covers the puck or tosses it unfairly?
Yeah, and the simple answer is yes, right? If there's like Tara said, the idea is you're trying to put the puck back in play in kind of a neutral way. And that again really depends on, and she touched on this really depends on the level and the context that you're working in. And maybe especially at a grassroots level, it's best just to stop the play if the players are having difficulty getting it out of their sleds. But again, in a more experienced context, they'll be a little bit better at just deflecting the puck back into play as normal. Tara, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add on that.
Doesn't sound like it. Okay, and so then there's been some suggestions, which are great, that are coming in just on how can we work to get more refs qualified at tournaments and just in the season, and those are great. And so we will definitely, I'll take those comments, and I'll share them with Dan, and we'll share them with anyone else that's working provincially with any of the para teams, and we can start to have those conversations. Another question that came in is pushing the opponent with one hand a penalty?
Yeah, not necessarily. And thinking about it again, trying to think about the purpose of that, right? And if we're thinking about players trying to battle for position, and again, this is where it's not really that much different than stand-up hockey. If players are battling for position and there's a little bit of a push because they're trying to occupy space and move the puck along, that's fine. If a player ignores the puck and shoves another player over, again, especially in a division where there's not checking, or even in a body checking division, there's still interference as a penalty. So I'd say kind of not a clear yes or no answer, but definitely some context there in terms of whether or not that would be a penalty.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. And then the next question is related to foot straps. The question says, we have required them for all players in grassroots because some players take a foot off the sled at times on the ice, but more often on the bench due to safety. The fitted buckets limit foot movement due to the tight fit, so not always needed. But what is the fair way to address feet coming off the sledge? I don't know if it would be more related. That might be Tara.
Yeah, so for us in Alberta, we don't require foot straps in our play. And it would be the same as if a player in stand-up hockey is not wearing their equipment on the ice, like if they're being unsafe, then that could be an assessed a penalty or have a warning or connection with the coach during a whistle down and play. So for us, that's something that as a coach, we would take priority on it. But I don't know, Dan, from your perspective with regards to athletes not properly using their equipment, if there would be an assessment of a penalty on that.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, yes. Kind of like you said, Tara, it's, no different than in stand-up hockey if a player's not wearing their equipment properly. But that's also something that comes into, and I think, if you're at a grassroots level, that's something like no different than in grassroots levels of stand-up hockey. That's sort of a collaboration with the coaching staff saying, hey, are we making sure that everybody's safe, everybody's geared up properly? And then at the more competitive level, that'd be something in my experience that we try to take care of beforehand. And again, like Tara said, just having the conversation with the coaches, right? And making sure that we are set because there are, no different than the Hockey Canada rule book. The para hockey rules have sort of specific guidelines on what equipment's supposed to look like. But at the end of the day, especially at the grassroots level, we try to kind of just take care of that in collaboration with the coaches. What we want is a safe game.
Perfect. There's lots of questions coming in. This is great. Lots of people interested. This is awesome. There was a question about goalie equipment. They are allowed to have the spike pad on the catch glove, 2 picks on the sticks as opposed to 2 per stick. Are they able to have any pick or spike on the blocker?
So I can answer this. So I know Steve. So this is something that we're working with the IPC on to look at with regards to goalie equipment. And this is a reminder too, when we look at the rules that Dan went over tonight, it's not that much different from para hockey when it comes to the rules themselves other than team. But there is a whole other beast when it comes to equipment with para hockey, and there is supposed to be an assessment. And when we look at the Paralympic Games, World Championships, IPC sanctioned event, there is an equipment inspector that goes to those games, and that is their main role and purpose is to check the equipment before the tournament and even during the tournament to make sure that athletes have not made illegal modifications to the equipment. So this is where us as a para hockey community, if that's something that we want to get more strict on, I don't believe it's up to the officials to make these changes or requirements. That people need to be trained with the IPC rule book on how equipment is supposed to be put on and making sure that it is not illegal, as that's something that's not put on the officials from an IPC perspective. So they work hand in hand with an equipment inspector to make sure that people are not illegally playing with equipment.
And I think just to add to that, Tara, and I'm by no means educated in any capacity, but I think this is a great time for coaches, especially at the grassroots level, that they would probably be more educated on the equipment side of it and can work with their current athletes to make sure that their equipment is correct.
Yeah, every rule about equipment is in the the rule book for IPC other than this one Steve's talking about. This is kind of what that is out there right now. So I know exactly. I actually have an email into IPC right now to ask Jan, who is the equipment inspector for the Paralympics, about this. But it is possible with regards to a coach going to their team and going over, okay, guys and gals, like this is what is allowed and not allowed. And right now in Canada, I've never seen it checked at a grassroots para hockey tournament. So that's just not something that grassroots para hockey has moved in towards yet. But it's not to say that we couldn't, as a community, start to look at equipment and making sure that there's nothing that's, unsafe. Anyways, I think some stuff is to do with an advantage, whereas other things are just unsafe, which would be my first priority, to make sure people are safe on the ice.
That's a good answer. And then Hannah asked a question, where did they go for the penalty? In the penalty box, or do they use an on-ice bench scenario?
So really, it's the same as the bench setup. In some cases, if there is a sled accessible bench, then the penalty box would be the same. But for the most part, most para games you'd encounter, it's an on-ice penalty. It's the same as the on-ice bench, where the players are still physically on the ice surface, but they're supposed to be acting as though they are not. So if the puck does come to them, they're just directing it back into the play. But again, that really depends on the game and the situation you're in.
Okay. Another question. There is lots. Good. Players are allowed to fall on the puck to protect it, but what if they put their glove on it and cover it? Is this a penalty or a face-off or nothing at all?
So from this perspective, it's the same idea as stand-up hockey, right? That the players have to keep the puck moving at all times. So if you do fall on top of the puck, you got to get up off the puck in a reasonable amount of time. And so to that point, if you cover the puck with your hand, could be a penalty, could be a hand pass, or it could be, they did put their hand down on the puck, but they immediately took it off and played the puck. Okay, well, that's nothing. So sort of not a yes or no answer there, but depending on the situation and what the player does, you just apply the rules in the most appropriate way.
Okay. This is an interesting one. If there's a shot on goal above the goalie's head and the goalie stops it with their stick, is this high sticking?
That's an interesting question, actually. I suppose it could be. Although, actually, you know what? That's good. Let's go to the next one. Let me just double check on that, because I remember seeing something about that, and I don't want to give an incorrect answer.
Okay. Actually, Dan has a question right here. Dan, I'll unmute you so you can ask the question.
Yeah. My question is if someone is pushing someone in a sledge and they accidentally lift them up with the front of their sled and hit someone in the face, is that a penalty against the player, or is that a penalty against the person that's pushing them?
All right, I lost my mute button. Tara, I don't know if you want to field that one, or I have some additions to that, but if you want to field that one, you can go ahead.
Yeah. So Dan, for that one, it would be the player and the pusher, the player being pushed and the pusher kind of the same individual or athlete on the ice. So that's where, same as the rules that we went through before around the pusher and what they can or can't do, that player that they're pushing would get the infraction. So that pusher and player would have to sit in the penalty box together. It doesn't matter who does those infractions. So that's where they really are a team, and they have to trust one another and make sure neither of them are going to send each other to the penalty box.
Yeah. And I also have another question. The other question is, if you're only allowed to push someone at a certain speed and they keep pushing them way over their speed limit, then there's a penalty against them again.
Yeah, according to the rules that we have right now, we would look to give them a warning first. I know that many officials will go over to the coach to talk to the coach to give them a warning. But then if they continue to do it, then they will get a penalty, a minor penalty assessed in order to know that that's unfair advantage.
Before we move on, just to go back to the question previously about the goaltender, is that as long as the goalie's making a save, they are allowed to sort of high stick the puck. And that's where and so again, as long as they're in their net, it's a shot on goal, they're making the save, the height of their stick doesn't matter. Obviously, you still, especially if it's, their players in and around the net, they're still responsible for not hitting anyone with that raised stick. But in terms of just high sticking the puck, that's fine if the goalie specifically is trying to make a save.
Perfect. And I think there's only one more question, possibly. If the puck is on the ice and the player bunts the puck with their glove as a pass or a shot on goal, would that be a whistled down play?
Yeah, so the hand pass rule in para hockey is the same as the hand pass rule in stand-up hockey, that you're not allowed to bat the puck with your hand unless you're batting it down to yourself and then playing with it. And that's where, again, that for a referee or a linesperson, the positioning really comes into play because the sticks are not very long. And so where does the stick end and the hand begin becomes a much more challenging judgment call or I should say not more challenging, but more frequent judgment call you have to make in para hockey compared to stand-up hockey. But at the end of the day, the rule itself is the same.
Okay. And then Mia asked a question about just the on-ice player benches. Is there an enforceable rule about them they cannot be inside the blue line? Then if that is an enforceable rule, how does that manage, with larger size teams?
I've never seen a team that is big enough to not have, it would be a really tiny neutral zone in order to not fit it, because most of our para hockey teams are 15 people or less. We don't have as large of teams as stand up. So, and especially if you have 5 athletes on the ice out of that team, it shouldn't be an issue, but it is something that I know I've seen teams that have kind of crept over the blue line. And so that's a warning by the referee to make sure that they're not interfering with that blue line so that there isn't any stoppage of the puck, allowing that puck to either be kept in or, by either whether you're on offense or defense. So yeah, we've always had to make it work one way or another to try and squish in the neutral zone, even if it's a tight fit.
Perfect. I think that's honestly it for the questions. And if anyone has questions that they think of, I will be sending out an email in the next tomorrow. And so feel free to just toss those questions in and we can get them answered that way as well, because we have some amazing resources in Dan and Tara. On top of that, though, I think we've probably capped our attention span for the night, and I can't say how appreciative I am of Dan and Tara taking their time tonight and sharing their passion with this game and really supporting this. Dan, do you have a question?
Sorry, I just wanted to throw one thing in there that I did see when I pulled up the chat. Some questions just about kind of the ongoing piece to this and what kind of happens beyond this. One of the things that I'm working on day to day is Hockey Canada's redoing our officiating curriculum. So how, for those of you that are officials with Hockey Canada right now, how you get certified, the clinic material, all that kind of stuff, we're totally redoing that for this summer. So when you go to your clinic next year, it's going to look different than it did in the past. Part of that is a para module that I'm working on with Tara and some of our other experts in officiating para hockey across the country. So for those of you that are officials or you're going to become an official, you'd like to become an official, as of this summer, there will be a standalone module on para that you can take. And to kind of, again, like this, to kind of give you some basic grounding before you go into a para hockey environment. So just wanted to throw that out there for those people that are wondering about that. That's something that will be available to any Hockey Canada official to access through an online platform. So just wanted to put that out there.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. That's awesome. And so again, that just leads to Dan's passion for even this side of it. And I think that's great that he's working so hard to get these modules done and a quick turnaround. That's also quite impressive. So great job on that. And Tara, thank you again for always your expertise and your excellent speaking. It's so greatly appreciated. And thank you everyone else for attending. We are recording this. So Hockey Alberta will have our video group go through it. They'll edit it and then it will get put up onto our website. And we will share it with everyone that's on this call tonight once we have it up and running. So that we'll have it posted on our website. So feel free to share it and use it to educate others as well. And then after that, we will wait for Dan's module and then we're rolling. Perfect. Well, thank you everyone so much for attending and you'll be seeing an email from me tomorrow. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your evening.